Picture a wide boulevard in the early 1960s, chrome glinting beneath streetlights and tailfins slicing the night air. The road feels like a stage, and every car rolling past is a character vying for attention. In that moment, vehicles were more than machines. They were declarations of optimism, prosperity, and ambition, each one designed to broadcast a promise of the future. Some of them captured that spirit so perfectly that even today, decades later, they feel like relics of a dream we never quite finished building. Imagine stepping back into that world. The sound of a big block engine echoing off storefronts. The smell of new vinyl interiors. The thrill of owning something that looked as though it belonged in a science fiction sketch. This isn't just about horsepower. It's about an era when the American driveway became a showroom for identity, style, and belief in tomorrow. And within that atmosphere lies a story of a machine that deserved far more than it received. If you're ready to explore how design, culture, and memory collide, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment with the next topic you want to see brought to life. The Plymouth Fury. 1960 was born into a marketplace that expected cars to be more than transportation. They were cultural symbols of progress. From its wide, sweeping lines to its confident stance, the Fury 1960 positioned itself as a full-size statement for buyers who wanted to show the world that they were riding the wave of America's golden years. Its place in the lineup was clear. Offer the flair and power to stand toe-to-toe with rivals, while still appealing to families eager for affordability. Yet even at launch, there were hints that the Fury 1960 would struggle to define itself fully in the eyes of a fickle audience. The question that emerges is how something so bold in its day became a shadow in automotive memory. Let's step back and uncover the foundation. Microstory. The promise of scale. In 1960, car buyers didn't just want machines that could get them to work. They wanted living rooms on wheels. The Fury 1960 promised precisely that. Long, low, and luxurious proportions that suggested the American dream had physical form. Imagine the feeling of pulling into a suburban driveway, the neighbors glancing over at a shimmering piece of futuristic sculpture. This was not just utility, it was theater. Plymouth engineers and designers worked to capture that effect, embedding in every curve the notion that size equaled success. Yet, within this grand vision, subtle flaws would emerge as the quest for visual impact sometimes outpaced practical considerations. The very element that attracted attention could ironically be the reason buyers hesitated. Context digest. The market in flux. The Fury 1960 was entering a competitive landscape in which families sought more than size. They wanted efficiency, reliability, and a sense of refinement. While buyers were dazzled by fins and chrome, they also whispered about costs, fuel economy, and quality. For Plymouth, straddling that divide between eye-catching style and practical reassurance was never simple. Competitors had already laid claim to certain buyer perceptions, leaving the Fury 1960 in a delicate position. Too ambitious to be modest, but not secure enough to dominate. Microstory. The designer's dilemma. Inside Plymouth Studios, there was pressure to stand apart. The Fury 1960 inherited the late 50s love affair with tailfins, yet the team faced the task of updating it without appearing outdated. Designers sharpened the lines, lowered the profile, and emphasized width to create a car that felt planted and modern. In mock-ups, it looked like a showstopper, but on the street, the timing collided with the public's growing weariness of excess styling. What once symbolized forward motion now looked slightly indulgent. In trying to chase relevance, the Fury 1960 ended up trapped between eras. Reflection bridge, the very thing that defined its character, threatened to undermine its acceptance. Microstory, the engine under the hood. Beneath the surface, the Fury 1960 had muscle. Plymouth offered V8s that gave the car authority on the highway, and enthusiasts who sat behind the wheel recall how it pulled with confidence. Yet the performance message was never pushed as strongly as the styling message. Buyers often judged first on looks, and when those looks divided opinion, the mechanical story became a secondary headline. That disconnect meant the Fury 1960's engineering prowess never fully translated into reputation. It had the ability, but lacked the narrative to match. Context digest. Quality concerns. Around this time, Chrysler as a corporation struggled with production consistency. Buyers occasionally encountered uneven panel fits, quirky electricals, or interiors that aged faster than they should have. For the Fury 1960, those stories cast shadows. Even if many cars rolled out strong, perception has power. And perception often turns on anecdotes rather than data. A few tales of frustration could overshadow countless miles of dependable service. And in the court of public opinion, the Fury 1960 found itself defending against doubts. Microstory, the showroom battle. Salespeople in 1960 had a tricky task. On one hand, they could boast about the Fury 1960's striking presence and competitive pricing. On the other, they knew that buyers often walked in already leaning toward a rival brand. Convincing someone to pivot required more than enthusiasm. It required proof. And proof is hard when reliability questions are floating in the air. Many dealers doubled down on visual appeal, staging the car under bright lights, gleaming in polished chrome, hoping first impressions would seal the deal. For some it worked. For others, hesitation lingered, and hesitation often meant lost sales. Reflection Bridge. The Fury. 1960 thus carried both potential and burden, its every strength paired with a counterweight. Context, digest. Cultural. Shifts beneath the surface of the marketplace, American culture was evolving. Families were beginning to think about suburban commutes, parking convenience, and the rising cost of fuel. The massive statement cars of the late 50s were beginning to look less practical and more like indulgences. The Fury 1960 was designed to symbolize abundance, but abundance itself was becoming a more complicated value. When culture shifts, even the boldest machine can find itself off balance. Microstory. A collector's spark. Decades later, the scarcity of the Fury 1960 became its allure. Those who stumbled across one in a barn or tucked away in a private garage saw not just a car, but a fragment of an era. Restorers described the challenge of bringing such a vehicle back to life, tracking down trim, repairing wide stretches of bodywork, coaxing an old V8 into song. But when complete, the Fury 1960 looks less like a relic and more like a time capsule. Its presence is so distinct that it feels like stepping through a doorway into 1960 America. Ironically, the very qualities that hurt it in its day made it unforgettable decades later. As we move forward, the next step is to explore not just how the Fury 1960 entered the world, but how its challenges escalated and revealed truths about design, branding, and the expectations of an entire generation. The Plymouth Fury 1960 carried the weight of expectation into its second chapter, and within months of launch, the cracks between vision and reception grew wider. To understand why the Fury 1960 struggled to maintain momentum, we need to look beyond the styling and into the forces that shaped its fate. It was not only a car, but a mirror of industry anxieties, consumer shifts, and the broader narrative of American ambition pressing against reality. Buyers wanted assurance as much as they wanted spectacle, and the Fury 1960 had to straddle that line with mixed success. What began as optimism soon transformed into a lesson in how timing, culture, and execution can decide the destiny of a full-size sedan. Microstory, the family test. In driveways across the country, families measured the Fury 1960 not in chrome but in comfort. Could it handle long summer road trips without fuss? Could the trunk swallow luggage for a week at the beach? The car largely delivered on space, and its bench seats promised room for kids and grandparents alike. Yet when small issues cropped up, sticky doors, rattles on rough pavement, or higher than expected fuel bills, owners felt let down. For them, size alone was not enough. Convenience and reliability mattered, and here the Fury 1960 often fell short. Context digest, engineering under pressure. The company faced intense competition, and rapid model turnover meant engineers had little time to refine each iteration. The Fury 1960, though advanced in some respects, was rushed through a cycle that favored boldness over polish. This environment made even minor flaws more noticeable. Buyers compared cars year to year, and any stumble could erode loyalty. The Fury 1960 was not alone in this struggle, but its position in the lineup made it particularly vulnerable. Microstory, The image problem, advertisements for the Fury. 1960 painted it as stylish and commanding. Yet the gap between ad copy and ownership reality became a sticking point. Some buyers felt the car promised a futuristic lifestyle, but delivered only modest improvement over their old sedan. This mismatch fueled skepticism. A car that looked like a star on a poster felt ordinary in the driveway. And when expectations are mismanaged, disappointment lingers longer than satisfaction. The Fury 1960s marketing built a stage too grand for its actual performance. Reflection bridge. It was becoming clear that the story was less about machinery and more about perception, and perception often moves faster than facts. Microstory. Dealer resentment. Behind showroom doors, some dealers grew frustrated. They saw potential buyers walk in, admire the Fury 1960, then leave without signing papers. Pressure mounted as inventory sat unsold, eating into profits. For the sales floor, this wasn't just a car, it was a test of survival. The frustration was palpable. Here was a car that should have been a winner, but instead demanded extra persuasion. That dynamic created tension between manufacturer promises and dealer realities, further complicating the Fury 1960's trajectory. Context digest. Public sentiment. Around 1960, trust in big corporations was still strong, but beginning to fracture. Consumers were savvier, paying more attention to what neighbors and local mechanics said than to glossy magazine spreads. Word of mouth mattered, and the Fury 1960 was vulnerable to quick judgments. If one owner shared a negative story at the office or the barber shop, that narrative could ripple outward. In this climate, the car's weaknesses were amplified while its strengths were quietly overlooked. Microstory. The enthusiast's eye. A small but vocal group of drivers saw the Fury 1960 differently. To them, its wide stance, strong V8, and distinctive look made it an underdog worth celebrating. They appreciated quirks, defended its design, and in some cases pushed it to limits on long highways or open backroads. For these enthusiasts, the Fury 1960 wasn't a disappointment. It was a misunderstood gem. Yet they were outnumbered by mainstream buyers who judged more critically. This divide between enthusiasts and the general market highlighted how polarizing the car had become. Reflection bridge. For every admirer who saw promise, there were many who saw compromise, and compromise rarely sells dreams. Context digest. The larger industry story. Automakers were in a cycle of constant reinvention, and one misstep could cost dearly. Styling trends shifted like fashion, and the Fury 1960 entered just as the pendulum swung away from excess. That meant it risked being dated almost as soon as it hit showrooms. Competing designs leaned toward cleaner lines, making the Fury 1960 look like a holdover from another decade. This clash of timing ensured its challenges weren't just temporary, they were structural. Microstory. The collector's rediscovery. In later decades, when nostalgia softened the harshness of its reception, collectors returned to the Fury 1960 with fresh eyes. What once seemed overwrought now looked daring. What once felt compromised now read as character. Restored examples at car shows drew crowds who admired their dramatic fins and sheer presence. Ironically, the same boldness that once cost it mainstream success became the reason it stood out in hindsight. The Fury 1960's second life was born not in the showroom, but in the memory of what cars once dared to be. The arc of this story was moving towards something larger than sales charts or production numbers. The Fury 1960 became an emblem of how ambition collides with reality, and next we explore how its legacy transformed into cultural resonance and historical significance. The Plymouth Fury 1960 closed its brief production run not with triumph, but with a complex legacy. And to understand that, we must consider how it lived on after the showroom lights dimmed. Mentioning the Fury 1960 is enough to spark debate among enthusiasts today, because its story resonates as both a cautionary tale and a time capsule of ambition. It represented a moment when car makers chased spectacle, yet buyers quietly began to demand substance. That collision defined not just one model year, but the trajectory of how the industry recalibrated its relationship with the American public. Microstory, the car show effect. At vintage exhibitions decades later, the Fury 1960 began reappearing. its tailfins and gleaming chrome sparking conversations. For older visitors, it brought back memories of a childhood driveway or a neighbor's pride and joy. Younger enthusiasts saw it as a bold curiosity, unlike the restrained cars of their era. In these gatherings, the Fury 1960 transformed from a forgotten model into a conversation starter, a symbol of how far design could stretch before practicality reeled it back in. The crowd's reactions showed how distance in time can turn criticism into admiration. Context Digest: the collector's market. The Fury 1960 never reached the stratospheric values of some contemporaries, but rarity added allure. Surviving examples became desirable for those chasing unique statements. Restoring one is no small task. Parts are scarce, trim is hard to source, and authenticity requires patience. Yet that challenge only fuels passion, and for collectors, the payoff is exclusivity. Owning a Fury 1960 means owning not just a car, but a piece of design history too distinct to fade into anonymity. Microstory: pop culture echoes. Over the years, the Fury 1960's silhouette appeared in film scenes, magazine spreads, and nostalgic art. While not always center stage, its dramatic form was unmistakable. Directors and illustrators leaned on its profile to evoke a period of exuberance and unchecked creativity. This presence in popular media ensured that even those who never saw one on the road could recognize its spirit. The Fury 1960 thus gained a cultural foothold, not by dominating sales, but by embodying an aesthetic that storytellers couldn't resist. Reflection bridge: legacy is not always measured in units sold. Sometimes it's measured in the echoes left behind. Microstory: the restoration journey. Enthusiasts who rescue Fury. 1960s often describe it as an act of preservation. They strip them to bare metal, rebuild engines with meticulous care, and hunt across the country for missing badges or period-correct upholstery. The process is slow and often expensive, but the result is stunning. A machine that gleams once again as though it had rolled off the line yesterday. For restorers, the satisfaction is not just in the final product, but in reviving a chapter of history nearly lost. In their garages, the Fury 1960 achieves immortality. Context Digest: lessons for the industry. Automakers learned from the trajectory of the Fury 1960. They discovered that style cannot overshadow function forever, and that consumers are quicker to shift than corporations expect. Future designs began balancing drama with restraint, setting the tone for a decade where performance and practicality would matter just as much as spectacle. The Fury 1960 may not have sold in droves, but its role as a turning point shaped strategies far beyond its own nameplate. Microstory: the symbol of transition. Today, when enthusiasts line up cars from the 1950s and 1960s, the Fury 1960 stands at a visible crossroads. Its extravagant fins whisper of the decade just ended, while its lower stance and broader body hint at the new direction ahead. This duality makes it more than just another model. It becomes a marker of change. To walk around one is to walk along the fault line between two eras, each curve telling a story of what America dreamed and what it decided to leave behind. Reflection bridge: by embracing both its flaws and its boldness, we see the Fury 1960 not as a failure but as a witness to transition. Context Digest: enduring fascination. Half a century later, the Fury 1960 still attracts attention. Not because it was perfect, but because it was unforgettable. Owners talk of strangers approaching at gas stations, curious about its make and year. Enthusiasts share stories online, trading tips about preservation. The car's endurance proves that memory is not built on numbers, but on impact. And the Fury 1960 left an impact disproportionate to its sales. Microstory: the final drive. Imagine sliding behind the wheel of a restored Fury 1960 today. The dash stretches out in gleaming detail, the V8 rumbles to life, and the road opens ahead. The ride feels different from modern cars, less insulated, more direct, but that's exactly the charm. Every mile is a reminder of when cars were unapologetically dramatic. For the driver, the experience is less about speed and more about immersion in history. The Fury 1960 becomes not just transportation, but a time machine. The story comes full circle. The Plymouth Fury 1960 started as a bold promise, faltered in execution, and rose again through memory, nostalgia, and preservation. What began as a forgotten chapter became a legacy etched in culture and design. Now the only question is what lessons we choose to carry forward. The Plymouth Fury 1960 may not have dominated sales charts, but within its lines lies a story that continues to matter. The Fury 1960 arrived at a moment when American car makers were chasing spectacle, yet consumers were beginning to demand something sturdier, more practical, and more lasting. That tension is exactly why its story resonates today. Looking back, the Fury 1960 shows how ambition can both elevate and undermine a vehicle, making it a blueprint of both brilliance and misstep. For US buyers at the time, the Fury 1960 promised excitement, size, and style, yet often delivered a mixed bag of thrills and frustrations. For present-day collectors, though, it represents rarity, character, and a direct line to an era of boundless optimism. This dual perception highlights what ownership really means. In 1960, practicality determined whether a family could commit to it. Today, passion determines whether someone will restore it. That evolution from commuter machine to cherished collectible underscores its cultural weight. From a market standpoint, the Fury 1960 illustrates how quickly consumer tastes can shift and how merciless the industry can be when timing is off. Rivals adapted more swiftly to changing preferences, leaving Plymouth's design language exposed as yesterday's news. Yet precisely because of that misalignment, the Fury 1960 has become a standout marker of transition, making it a touchstone for anyone studying automotive history. On the legacy side, the Fury 1960 tells us that success is not always immediate. Sometimes recognition comes decades later, through car shows, private garages, and nostalgic reflections. Its influence on design strategy, reminding automakers that style must be paired with dependability, shaped the trajectory of an entire decade. And its enduring presence among enthusiasts proves that even cars overshadowed in their day can achieve immortality through passion and memory. In the end, the Fury 1960 reminds us that automotive history is not just about winners and bestsellers. It is about the bold experiments that pushed boundaries, even when the market wasn't ready. It is about the machines that defined transitions, standing between eras as bridges of design and culture. For anyone who values the full sweep of America's car story, the Plymouth Fury 1960 is not forgotten. It is essential. And perhaps that is the truest measure of legacy, when a car that faltered in its prime still compels us to talk about it, half a century later, with awe and curiosity.